Hello and welcome to the Womb Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and I have Denise here with me today. Thank you so much, Denise, for joining us. Denise is one of the writers in the Asian Women Who Boss Up book, right? One of the latest Women Who Boss Up books. If you've been following this podcast, you probably remember other participants in that set of book projects, not just Asian Women Who Boss Up, but Women Who Boss Up and Women of Color Who Boss Up. I've interviewed people from all of these projects. So glad to have you here on the podcast, Denise. Thank you for coming on. And today I'm really focusing my conversations recently on how this enchantress archetype is weaving through, dancing through, enchanting through our womb-centered healing journey. And we were talking a little bit before we got started here about what that looks like, just to frame the conversation here, because writing a book is very much an enchantress, or being part of a collaborative book, or however we write a book, is really part of the enchantress archetype, is stepping into that enchantress of saying, this is my voice, this is my vision, this is my soul purpose, and I'm going to express it into the world in such a way to enchant the world, to see things the way I see them, and to understand my story and receive the gifts of who I am and what I've lived through. And so that's very much this enchantress archetype. And the enchantress it can be very much associated with the premenstrual phase of our menstrual cycle, when our voice of like what's really right and true for us becomes quite strong. And if there's things misaligned in our lives, that's oftentimes when we have severe premenstrual symptoms, when things are misaligned and there's a lot of friction or turbulence between what feels true and right and good in our core and what's actually happening in our lives, right? And then also the same thing happens in our perimenopausal phase, which can be up to 10 years before menopause. It's like a whole life review of like, are we really aligned with this soul purpose that's going to be coming through really strongly in our menopausal years? And so there's this whole realignment, reassessment, evaluation, that voice again coming up really strong, needing to be expressed. So I'm so glad you're here to share with us about your enchantress journey, your womb-centered healing journey. I know from our previous conversations that you've got quite a number of things to say about this and stories to share with us about this. So please introduce yourself and share with us about that.
Sure. Great. Thank you so much, Sama. As Sama said, I'm Denise Michelle. I am located in Los Angeles, and I've been on quite a journey. I'm what you call the self-love alchemist. That's part of my branding. My company is called Bridge the Love, and really, I would say everything about my journey is helping people come back to their authentic selves through love. And it's a deep process. It's all about self-love, self-healing, self-reflection, personal development and growth, and bridging love into the world. And we can really only meet people as deep as we've met ourselves. So it's the process that I go through with myself and people is we're breaking through a whole lot of stuff. Let's put it that way. I've healed a lot of trauma in my life, and I don't regret any of it. I mean, I wouldn't want anybody to experience what I've had to experience in my life, from birth, being born with a mental illness called borderline personality disorder, that coming through my mother's womb, and having to live and suffer through that through a good part of my life, and until I was first diagnosed with it, to be making the choice to heal it. And it wasn't easy. It took me over 14 years to heal that one alone. And then moving into, healing everything from anxiety and suicidal depression, sexual abuse and trauma, domestic stuff, what else? Oh my gosh, like financial bankruptcy and ancestral healing and generational, it goes way back. And I would say that I really I look at the womb as just such a, I mean, it's our portal, it's our portal. It's our only way here on this planet, through the mother. And when it comes to the mother wounds and healing that, and I spent a good 7 years healing that with my mom, and having gone through the entire journey with her, up until the passing of her life, from COVID in December of 2020. Just the lessons continue to show themselves, I would say. So I would say that when it comes to that healing process and that self-discovery process, if we don't go in and start to understand these parts of ourselves, how are we going to get to know who we really are? Through, and I know Sama will agree with this, through the shadow is the light. And there's so many treasures living inside of us, but we will never truly know them unless we go in to make those self-discoveries, and we start getting curious about what these things are, and we start looking at people as reflections in our life.
Yeah. So powerful what you're sharing about, and all of these. I mean, even just one of these healing processes that you spoke of could be the basis for any individual's like very in-depth healing process and body of work, right? Just so that your list is so extensive of healing processes. It's like, wow, the enchantress is strong with you, if you will.
Yes.
And so it sounds like you have all these experiences, and I'm really curious about what you shared about having this mental health diagnosis and your awareness that it was passed to you through the womb. And I'm sure that this wasn't an awareness that you grew up with necessarily. And so I'm curious how you figured that out, like how you received that insight and how that worked. And I'm really curious because I feel and have a sense, but don't always know how to articulate the connection between our experiences in the womb and mental illness, and our experience of the womb, of our menstrual cycle and our hormones and our endocrine system, and how those affect mental illness. And very few medical practitioners, especially psychiatric practitioners, include the whole womb system in their reflections and treatment of mental illness. And yet it sounds to me like in your healing process, you became aware of at least how your experience in your mother's womb affected your mental health and all of that, and resulted in this diagnosis. And I'm also curious if you explored along the way of how your womb cycle, your menstrual cycle, influenced and participated in the healing process of this. So there's a lot of questions in there, and I'll let you.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, and I love where this is going. So, well, I would say, I mean, what do we know when we're in the womb? We feel everything our mothers feel, right? And I know that when I was conceived, I was not conceived in love. I was not held in the womb in love, and I was not born into the world in love. And even, bless her soul, if she were here, my mother would be able to agree with that. And we had many conversations about it. And it wasn't her fault, and it wasn't my dad's fault. It was the circumstance in which my body or my soul came through this body. So when I was in my mother's womb, my parents were in a very tumultuous relationship at that point, and I was not a planned pregnancy. It was more of my mom went to go get on the pill and or in some sort of birth control, and come to find out she's pregnant with her second child. Well, I'm actually her third child, but her second child with my dad. And whoops, and she immediately starts crying because now she knows that this is not going to be the kind of pregnancy she had with my sister. Because my parents had so much turmoil and very little emotional intelligence, you can imagine the provocation that each of them continued to project onto each other, right? All his pain, her pain. And because she had grown up in a household that was extremely mentally, emotionally, and physically abusive, it all just came flooding back. And not only did it come flooding back, it was in her all the time, except now it's just getting amplified. And guess who gets to feel all of this? Little me. As I developed, I felt her feelings. It was almost like I could think her thoughts. I knew, and I know this from deep hypnotherapy work and deep healing work that I've done, I knew what was hers and what was mine and what I gathered from her to bring into my life. And because I remember seeing glimpses as the mental illness developed, which borderline personality disorder is basically like, if, in a nutshell, you're highly dysregulated in your emotional state. You have no real identity. You see things in black or white. Every human has tendencies of what BPD is, but obviously I experienced those things to an extreme. And I have really, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because all I wanted was love, but I didn't know how to achieve love. Because if we really look at love and we really look at the way that people are I guess having their experience, it's either a call for love or this is their way of showing love. Well, oftentimes it was a call for love, and whether they were tantrums or I would manipulations, to try to find, how am I supposed to get this love that I am so craving, because love is our birthright, right? We're not born into the world thinking that we're going to have to struggle for survival with love. But that's what ended up happening with me. I didn't know how to achieve love. And so I would try all these different things. And then eventually you find ways to manipulate people to get the love, but you're not really even receiving the love that you're wanting. Anyhow, moving, fast forwarding to when I was diagnosed at 26 years old, I actually diagnosed myself. I found it. It was something that I was dating somebody at the time, and I had gotten into a really big argument with him and his brother said to me that I was emotionally unstable. And I took that to heart, and I knew he was right. And I literally looked up on the internet, and there wasn't a ton back then. This is 2005. I put it into the search box, and there it was, borderline personality disorder in black and white. And so I started reading about it and just became enthralled, like, oh my God, this is it. There's a name for all the things that I do, all my behaviors, and what I was attracting in my life, and the kinds of things that I was experiencing. It was all right there. And then the next stage of it would be to find a therapist who could help me. Later on, I would be led to leaving my corporate job and going into treatment at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and outpatient treatment, and saving my life, which leads me into the work that I'm doing now. So looking at all of that, and really, at the same time too, because when it comes to the womb, right, for me, when I was a teenager, that's when I started realizing I could use my sexuality as a form of receiving love,
Mhm.
thinking that that's what it was. Obviously, it was not. And I ended up becoming extremely promiscuous and um, um, self-destructive in my sexuality, and manipulative, and um, none of it felt really good, and all I wanted was genuine, authentic love, you know so over the years, as it developed, and I would continue to get into relationship after relationship, and it wasn't until like spiritual awakening started happening, and when I was 32 is when, after ending a 2-year relationship, um, that's when I decided that I needed to make some really big changes, and I started on the path of celibacy then, which would be a whole other thing, and all of this just, it even comes down to, when I talked about sexual trauma when I was a little girl, and I was molested, and going into my sexuality, that part of my body shut down. So I couldn't even really truly experience true pleasure, or um, um, I was blocked. Let's put it that way. I was blocked sexually, even though I was out there having a lot of sex and doing, manipulating with my body and all of this stuff. I was blocked. And there was, and I believe obviously that has to do with the heart chakra, that has to do with, your sacral, like all of this was just cloudy and blocked, and I didn't know what to do.
That's something that so many people are starting to discover about sexual trauma, especially early childhood sexual trauma, that there's a physiological shutdown that happens that takes some work to reverse, and that there that there's a very much of a somatic aspect, a body centered aspect to healing from sexual trauma that we're only just beginning to explore in the arenas, the therapies, that are approaching that aspect of healing. And so I'm curious as to, besides your journey of celibacy, what kind of somatic healing approaches have you explored to enliven your womb again after those experiences?
Yeah, all of this has happened in the last, I want to say, about 4 or 5 years, is where I went really, really deep into my sexual healing. And it's been everything from EFT to hypnosis to going into body work, and really just even allowing myself to surrender into touch. Somebody learning, just touching my body, not sexually, but just touching my body and feeling comfortable with that, to, like being in safe environments where I would be in a community, and just letting my community know, my girlfriends, for example, and just saying, I need to receive love right now. I need a hug, and just allowing myself to start taking down the armor.
Mm.
Because there were so many layers. And I remember when I was a teenager, I didn't know how to express what I was feeling in a cognitive way, because that wasn't really invited, I guess you can say. So I did it artistically. I did it through poetry. And I look back at some of my poems that I wrote when I was 16 years old, and I was like, dang, a 16-year-old should not be feeling the things that I was feeling. And I would talk about my sexuality. I would talk about how thick, I called it plexiglass thick. I didn't want anybody to penetrate my heart, because I was so guarded. And that just grew and grew and grew. And to be able to have, to be able to start seeing this and start to take those layers off of myself over these last years of my healing, I would say the last 20 years of my healing. And then there were times, especially in my sexual healing, where I would even try to dip my toe in, and I really relied on spiritual guidance for this too, that if I was aligned with the right person, let's say I got a crush on somebody and I explored that, and I would observe what how we would either align or we would misalign or we would dissolve, or but I learned to start taking my hands off the steering wheel so it could just naturally unfold. And what I discovered was, I actually wrote an article in Elephant Journal about it, that's called Why I Won't Have Sex with You, because I talked about my celibacy journey. And it really, a lot of it came down to the deeper that I learned to love myself, to see myself, the more that I could really allow myself to blossom and open up. But it came down to everything from like learning how to even accept and touch myself, not just in a in a regular way, just giving myself a hug, but even learning how to touch myself sexually, because there's so many blocks when it comes to that. Because, and I don't want to say it's all programming, but there was a sense of programming, just knowing from my mother, who saw her sexuality as shameful because she had a child at 16 years old. So it's like, so that was even something that I realized later on was ingrained in me, that I even had to heal that part.
Yeah. Wow. So it sounds like that you've been going through quite a process, and I'm curious about some aspects of this healing process that I'd like to hear more about. So, especially in this sense of developing discernment about who you open up to, because I can see the potential for recognizing the barriers to intimacy and wanting to just tear those down and open up without discernment, and then having repeat renditions of the similar kinds of experiences that feel harmful. And then those walls, that plexiglass wall just pops right back up again. And I'm curious if that scenario sounds familiar to you, because we talk about sexual healing as a physical thing where we need to shed the armor, but my experience is the only way we can shed the armor is if we learn how to discern, like what you were talking about, of saying, okay, this is a person that I'm safe with. This is a person that will respect me, that will consider my needs and desires, that will be able to hear no as well as yes from me and respect that and not violate my boundaries. This is, and that's a lot to ask, unfortunately, in our culture, especially when we're talking about heterosexual relationships with women, trying to be in relationship with men. Men are taught that they get to have whatever they want from a woman. They're initiated to think that they can demand and expect women to just cater to their needs and desires and pleasure without needing to tend to or care for the woman. This is just the baseline of men learn to expect from absorbing from their fathers, just like a role model, right? And from the adult men in their life. And so very few men are initiated or somehow learn, even if they aren't initiated, to care for a woman.
Yeah. And that was a big thing when I, being on the celibacy journey, because it all came down to strengthening that muscle for myself, and this is the self-love, right? realizing that whatever I was seeking to receive from someone else, I had to learn how to give that to myself first. And so I started learning how to own my sexuality without acting upon it.
Mm.
And
What
it
did
was,
that look like? Could you say a few more words about that? Could you
yeah,
give us a little,
yeah.
how did you discover that? What did you do when you first said, I'm going to do that?
It was an interesting process, and I would actually have a talk in depth with he was an ex-lover, but he was a person I dipped my toe into and needed to learn some lessons, and so he was a person I broke celibacy with for a brief period of time. And but in that, what I would do was owning my sexuality in the way that I would allow myself to be feminine, and not so feminine to where I'm just like, just showing myself off. I was literally letting myself shine. And it even went down to like not even wearing panties. Going and for several years I didn't. I under my clothes, I needed to just be free. And so I just stopped wearing panties because I felt like this was a part of me owning my sexuality and learning how to hold my divine feminine without acting upon it, right? And knowing like, and then understanding also, how do I learn how to use this without manipulating the energy of men at the same time? Now, as that lesson, as I would say, that lesson really started to reveal itself, and I started understanding that one of the things that really held me back and why I chose celibacy, why I kept coming back to celibacy, because over a path of 9 years, there was a very small handful of times where I did break celibacy, and each time it was for the lesson, and then I would go right back, and it really came down to, at the end of it, when I really decided this is time, when I spent over 4 years completely celibate, that I started clearing out the energy. And I realized, because when we are intimate with people, we are absorbing energy. And I made a decision that, just like people with germs, I kind of treated it like that. And I was like, I have stuff that I want to be clearing out, and I don't want to be taking on anybody else's, because I know that if I sleep with this man, if I scratch that itch, then I know that I'm absorbing not only his energy, but the energy of his partners too. And so I made that decision to break that cycle. And so,
okay, this is bringing up other questions for me.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious about what methods you were engaging in to clear that energy for yourself. That, because this is, not everyone, first of all, is aware of the absorptive quality of sexuality, especially for women, for anyone receiving someone else's sexual organs or body parts inside of, the vaginal opening. Even, I'm sure, anally that could happen too. Just that when we receive someone else inside of our body, our mouth, whatever it is, that we are receiving energetically. And especially if there's any exchange of bodily fluids, not everyone is aware of that energetic and emotional absorption. I mean, and you don't even have to have that kind of penetration, just being physically holding someone's hand, you can absorb their energy. Just being in the same room, having a conversation with someone, we can absorb their energy. And so when it does become that intimate physically, it's even that more so. And when there is more of an intense sexual exchange going on, that it's even more so, because we're that root essence of who we are. It's designed to be an exchange of that root essence. So I'm curious of how you became aware of that absorptive quality and what you started to practice to clear out what you had absorbed already from the past. And, of course, taking on that practice of, I don't want to absorb anymore because I'm in this process of clearing out, right? And so I'm curious what methods you were using for that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's when I started, it was around that time when I started really understanding what an empath was. And, as a person who, was in yoga teaching and meditator, I was a body worker, and I realized, especially during my body work journey, like how easy it was to absorb people's energy through my hands and through the work that I was doing on them. And I was like, whoa, okay. And I started getting sick. I started getting sick. So I started having these physical symptoms and realizing, whoa, this stuff isn't mine. And so this is where I learned to call upon, okay, so like the angels, the archangels, for example, I would call in spiritual guides to support me, to put a protective layer around me. At the same time, I would use crystals. There are certain crystals that absorb energy, that mean that energy is not going to go into me. So when I would do body work sessions, for example, I would use tourmaline. I would have tourmaline literally Velcroed underneath the table so that it was getting absorbed into that and not me. I would be wearing tourmaline as well. When it came to like the sexual healing, it came down to learning how to cut cords, learning how to, and it was something that I started learning how to do daily. And these were things that I was doing when I was working with spiritual healers, and they would start explaining to me about, they would talk to me about energy and releasing the cords and realizing, whoa, there's so much attached to me, because I could feel it. And I was like, no wonder I've been so confused. This stuff isn't mine. This is all someone else. Many someone else's, right? And then when I went in to start healing internally, my womb and my sexual healing, it started coming down to yoni eggs, whether it was rose quartz or obsidian, even obsidian wand, and learning how to like release that energy. So when I broke celibacy after, 4 years, it was the first time in my life I didn't feel trauma, which was crazy to me.
So the first time in your life that you didn't feel trauma during a sexual encounter. So my question is, just for, listeners to have a sense of, what does that mean? How did you know the difference? Like, what did you experience that was so different than all the other sexual experiences that you had? And how did you know that, oh, I'm feeling this difference because I'm not having a trauma response. I'm not feeling traumatized by this sexual encounter now. Wow. Like, for the first time, how did you know that was the case? And if you can explain it in such a way that someone else might be able to relate to that, like,
yeah. Well, it has to do with communication, communicating to the man that I was with, and he knew a bit of my history, and so he knew that he had to go slow. And I let him know that. I was like, I need to take this slow. I'm literally coming out of years of not being touched. So feeling honored there, and a lot of it came down to like, okay, slow down, speed up, slow down, speed up. It's okay, like, and then if he would get more ambitious, let's say, like, I kept reminding myself, right now I'm safe. I am safe and I am protected. And so what I realized was happening was that not only was my heart opening, but my yoni was opening as well. And I was also observing the thoughts in my mind, that the thoughts in my mind weren't making my body contract. And this is the first time this had ever happened to me, because all of my other sexual encounters, I was always in my head. And I was learning now how to be in my body. And I was like, whoa, this is a totally different experience. And I knew that even if the relationship didn't work out, what I was experiencing was something that I wasn't going to regret.
Mm. Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. And so this was the first time that you had that kind of confidence too, that I'm not going to regret this. I know for sure. And here I am having this experience.
I didn't know for sure while it was happening, but after it was over the next day, next couple of days, I was like, huh, I feel fine. This is pretty amazing. So, there is that point where you have to take a leap of faith because there is an uncertainty to it, and
Right.
you have to, and that's the discernment, right? Um, you have to allow yourself to choose the right person to do this with.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm no longer with this person, but again, I don't regret it. I don't regret that it was him. He was what I needed at that time for me to move into this part of myself, so that now when I align with my true love, my divine partner, I know what it's supposed to feel like now.
Mm.
I'm ready for that, right? It was a stepping stone.
Right. Beautiful. And you, having had the experience, it sounds like in previous encounters where afterwards you're like,
Oh yeah, there was a lot of regret. There was a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, because I didn't have a voice. It was because of that I was raped twice.
mm,
And I'm not saying that the rapes were my fault. I didn't know how to say no. And when I did say no, they definitely couldn't hear me.
mhm,
And it was a very painful process. And I would say, this is why it's so important for us to practice using our voice and, not just being discerning, but like check in with your body, because your body is going to tell you if you feel safe with this person.
right.
Why are you doing this in the first place, right? And everything that I do, which is why I've chosen the path that I've chosen, I do things with intention now. I don't do things out of I need to fill a void, or I'm trying to find more love, or I'm trying to do this. I'm doing it because I know that I'm intentionally stepping into what it is that I'm here to learn right now in this moment.
Mhm.
Everything is a learning process for me.
Right. Whereas previous, it might have just been out of compulsion or
Impulse or
impulse.
obsession or whatever it was, right? It always went back to those patterns, those habits.
Mhm. Beautiful. Well, I have so many more questions, and viewers who are watching the video who see me picking my glasses and checking the time, that's the first clue that, oh yeah, we're coming up on our time here for this first podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you have so much more to share. I know you've written a chapter in the Asian Women Who Boss Up. Is that chapter about your self-love journey?
It's about my self-love journey, but I would say it's more about the entrepreneurial journey. I do tap into self-love, but I talk about my entrepreneurial journey, which started as a yoga instructor and a yoga studio owner, and taking the leaps of faith to start a business out of nothing.
And I'm sure that we could find some very potent parallels between some of the things we were just talking about with your sexual healing journey and the entrepreneurial journey of being able to have a voice, have your voice be heard, being able to be discerning with your entrepreneurial partnerships and all of that. I'm sure we could have a whole nother podcast talking about that. And as I was saying when we first were connecting before we started recording, I just want to share that the enchantress archetype helps us to bring to align our personal healing journey and translate that into our professional or service to the world journey, and letting our voice be an expression of our unique medicine in the world. And that's where all the work of the enchantress, of working with our shadows and all of these difficult yet essential healing processes we've been talking about, become really essential to be able to alchemize that, all of our shadows, into the medicine that's beneficial for others as well as ourselves. And so I just want to honor your enchantress journey, and how I'm sure if we got on another podcast and did a part 2, we could really get into how all of this work that you did in your very deeply intimate healing journey translates into skills and abilities and challenges and processes that work as well in the entrepreneurial realm. So that will have to wait till part 2, however. So, if folks in the meantime want to get in touch with you and learn about your self-love work and learn about your book that's available now, I'm pretty sure, how might they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so they can find me on my website, which is called bridgethelove.com. And you can also find me on social media. So Instagram is one of my main platforms, which is Denise Michelle XOXO. And I put a lot of content about there. Everything I really post about is about self-love, self-care, and self-healing. And going even deeper into the work, it's about finding solutions personally, professionally, and globally with love. No easy task, but I really feel like if we can start to learn to get past the ego and, start seeing each other in our traumas, start seeing each other with a more compassionate and forgiving heart, we're going to have a lot less conflict in the world. We really will. But it all starts with us, with ourselves.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So I encourage folks to reach out and connect with Denise Michelle. And also, listeners know that if you want to learn more about what's happening in the Womb-Centered Healing Temple, the platform, the online space that this podcast is a part of, you can go to wombcenteredhealing.com and subscribe to the newsletter there. You'll get notifications when there's new episodes of the podcast, as well as blog posts and any upcoming events, courses, collaborative projects, things like that. So hope to see you there. And thank you so much. Denise, are there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with folks?
Well, I would say that, when it comes to really allowing yourself to I would say embracing your path, just remember to be so kind and so gentle to him or her, or they, however you refer to yourself. Be kind to yourself, because you know what? This is a lifelong process, and you're going to continue to make these discoveries about yourself until the end of your life. And there's no rush. Be patient, be kind, be gentle, give yourself a lot of grace, and know that you are supported. You're not in this alone. And even though it sometimes feels like you are, that there are people out there like me or Sama or, other practitioners, other healers, other light workers, who are on this path, because we're here to share the wisdom that we've learned with you, so you don't have to do this on your own.
Thank you so much, Denise. I'm just really receiving all of that into my heart today, too. It was like you were saying all those things just for me, so thank you so much. And I'm sure other listeners would probably feel that as well. So thank you for sharing such tender, loving wisdom with us. And so I'll end this episode with a round the world hug. I like to share round the world.
Love that.
You can just imagine a big hug going between us that encompasses the whole world and everyone on it, everyone who's listening to this in the future, and ourselves would just all feel that hug and receive that hug anytime anyone gets to this point. We'll just have that hug. All right. Thanks so much. That's all for now. Until next time.